Oh, all right, I'll start admitting. All
Hi
right.
there. Okay. Well,
Okay.
I'll begin.
All right.
Um,
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Amel Hussein and I'm excited to welcome you to this month's edition of the SciCommers Mentor Chat series. It's wonderful to welcome you all today. And for those of you who are new, SciCommers is a community that empowers science communicators through mentorship, dialogue, and skill building. Our mentor chats are an invaluable opportunity to connect directly with some of our experienced professionals who are communicators in the field. So these sessions are designed to help you gain insider perspectives, but also to foster meaningful conversations and for you to be able to build those mentoring relationships with professionals out in the field. And so today we're really honored to welcome Abigail Eisenstadt, a science writer for the AAAS Science Family Journals. And Abigail brings a wealth of experience in science storytelling, editorial insight, and she wants to give us an insider's view of the journal packages that are offered. And so those are critical platforms for cutting edge research, science communication, and areas for policy change. And so Abigail is going to show us her presentation. So without further ado, Abigail, feel free to share your screen with us.
it should be available. Are you able to see it?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Okay, I will stop sharing and reshare. Is it visible?
I think yes, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for having me here. Um, as Amel said, I am a science writer for the journal Science Advances. I also create content for our team's social account, and my job is basically about promoting news coverage on published studies. So Matt Wright is our deputy director. He is the editor for all of the sibling journal press packages, and he manages 3 writers, including myself. He also juggles a multitude of other communications projects. And then Megan Fellon is the communications director for the Science Family of Journals overall. And she's the editor of our flagship press package, which is the Science Press Package. And she works with our 4th writer. So Megan sets our team's press strategies, handles communications for the journal leadership, including our editor-in-chief, Holden Thorpe. And she steers our own communications efforts about issues regarding open access and scientific integrity. So we're meeting with you today because those of you contemplating a career in science journalism can learn how to use our press packages and even other institutional press packages as resources for stories and for finding contact information for corresponding or first authors. And then for those of you thinking about a career in communications, this is kind of a peek at a less common subsection of public information officer or PIO work. So that's the scope. And then I wanted to give a little bit of context about where we work before we get into what we actually do. So the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS, is a membership organization, and it's a publishing institution originally known for the over a century-year-old journal Science. But in the last decade, AAAS launched 5 other sibling journals, which include Science Advances, and then Science Robotics, Science Immunology, Science Translational Medicine, and Science Signaling. And there are several other journal publishers who have press packages similar to ours, including Springer Nature, which you might be familiar with, and Cell Press. And there are others as well. But so my team is part of the AAAS editorial department, where we oversee communications as it pertains to research within science and the 4 sibling journals. We don't handle membership communications. We also select timely research from these journals to promote at our organization's annual meetings. So these are the annual research meetings, but many reporters attend them. So our process is straightforward. Once a journal editor accepts a paper, we step in to handle author communications and begin press outreach efforts, which take the form of our weekly press package and other initiatives, which I'll get into. Before we get into that, though, there are 2 important points that I really want to stress. Our team wants AAAS research to be covered accurately or not at all. And we spend a lot of time thinking about why each study may be tricky to cover and how we can address each study's nuances to make it easier on reporters. We're also constantly evaluating what problems are surfacing in science communication and keeping an eye on the landscape as it evolves so that we can focus on helping journalists to the best of our ability. It all boils down to the fact that our goal is not just to get hits. We don't just want media hits. We want to secure coverage that's done right. We want transparency, we want nuance, and we don't want overhyping. So now, as promised, here's what we do. Our team works with all 6 of the journal's editorial teams to create 6 press packages highlighting new research every week. And these are accordingly called the SciPack, Advanced Pack, Med Pack, RoboPack, Sick Pack, and Immunopack. We also have one new press package that shares policy relevant findings from all 6 of the other, from all 6 of the journals. So we select specific studies based on those. And again, like I mentioned, we're led by communications director for the family of journals, Megan, and our deputy director is Matt Wright. So we have the 4 writers, including myself, and what we do is we survey upcoming papers in our respective journals, and we translate those studies into about 250-word lay language summaries. And in each of those summaries, or akin to a news brief, we contextualize the papers and we flag how they move their respective fields forward. On the flip side of the writing, we have 4 communications associates and 1 senior associate, and they collaborate with authors and institutional press officers. So these are the people who work at universities, for example, but also government funders. And they're the crux of our communications associates work with these people. So they're the crux of our reporter outreach pipeline because they make it as easy as possible for journalists to get what they need when covering our research. And then the press packages go live every Sunday evening on Eureka Alert, which is a web page that is available to registered reporters during an embargoed period. So reporters can access this before the study is actually published, and that allows them time to reach out to outside experts, understand the study a bit more, get a maybe outside of the author group assessment of the study. So this is what a sample press package looks like. And then you'll see on the left, we have one of our Science Advances press package emails that went out. And you can also see that the summary includes quotes by the author from the paper to flag that this paper is pretty easy to read. And the most important stuff goes first, and in the middle is the methods, etc. And on the right are the download links that we have where reporters can access PDFs. And this also sometimes includes multimedia, and we can link to news releases that we receive from author press offices at universities. So essentially this combined, which goes out with 5 separate ones of these every week, is meant to be a one-stop shop for journalists to learn as much of what they need to know to cover the papers as possible. So again, we usually have 5 summaries, so 5 of these things within each press package, and there are 6 press packages, and those all go live on Sunday night. So come Monday morning, they're in around 7,000 to 8,000 reporters' inboxes ready to provide story inspiration. So then after that happens, and after the embargo lifts, we track news coverage and follow up authors with a post-publication survey. So this is how we track coverage. We both monitor Google and we use a platform called Altmetric, and through it we can see where coverage comes from. What I liked about this study in particular was that it got coverage in food and wine, which is a little off the beaten path for science journalism. So it was a nice study because it was very compelling. So anyway, our intentional strategy involves 3 ingredients. And I'll go into detail about them in the following slides. But this is how we create the press package and how we operate as a team. As I mentioned earlier, we focus on jargon-free summaries, 250 to 300 words. And again, as I was explaining while going through this summary that I showed you, they're in the news pyramid style. The most important information comes in the lead and the graph. Then we have some background or context, and then we touch on methods, and we often close with a quote as a kicker. And this seems pretty simple or methodical, but it's actually more complicated because in addition to finalizing 4 to 6 summaries every week, we also want to make sure, again, that we're not exaggerating the findings and that we're representing limitations because we want to convey nuance. And we see these stuff as trust building actions that we take to affirm our relationship with reporters. So To be sure that our summaries are accurate, we work during the week with the journal editor who handled each respective paper. And that their feedback ensures that our summaries are about 100% factually correct. And this is also a way to build cross-departmental trust, which is important when you're a science communicator and you're interacting with scientists who, need to practice communication themselves, as I'm sure you know as well if you're in the certificate program. So essentially, I can't reiterate this enough. Credibility is the cornerstone of our press package. That's our philosophy. It's something you can count on, whether you're using our briefs as inspiration for a story, or whether you're collaborating with us to represent an author at your institution, or if you're an author yourself. We want to make sure we get the findings right. So I wanted to do a little bit of a demo on how we take something that's very complex and distill it into a title. So these titles can seem a little technical, but because we have to keep an eye on so many papers, over time we've become good at recognizing what stands out. So this first study is important not only for how well my colleague was able to translate it, but also because we did a press summary on it. But essentially, the chloramine study may seem hard to spot, but chloramines are disinfectants for water. And so if you're writing a lot of environmental science studies, which we're all kind of jacks of all trades, so we're aware of these things. And since we know that chloramines are disinfectants, and we see that decomposition is tied into it, we're learning that a disinfectant, there's something about the study that talks about a disinfectant decomposing in water. And so then we go to the abstract and we can find out what the study is about. And Walter did an amazing job, which is his title right here. Chlorotrimimide anion, a newly characterized contaminant, prevalent in chloramine treated tap water, prompts toxicological assessment. And this was a very important study, actually. I tend to review his papers because we have a round robin, and I love reading his summaries every time. So anyway, gushing aside, another example is a title that I wrote from Science Advances, and we have human-driven extinction in this title. And so it's kind of buried because scientists can sometimes do that, where you have the most technical words at the beginning and the end, and that's the most important to the methods, but the thing that might stand out is in the middle. So we saw human-driven extinction, and we saw that as a signal to look more closely. And then also proboscideans are elephants and woolly mammoths. So that made it pretty easy to decide to cover it. And so what I made from this title was this head. The emergence of humans coincides with an extinction rate surge for proboscideans, the group that includes woolly mammoths. So I'm just going to show this and then we can walk through it. But we look at these summaries every single week, and the first pass we do is always focused entirely on titles. And so, like this research titles. So we have a high-resolution MRI reveals utero-placental flow dynamics in a 3D printed human placental cotyledon model. And we passed on this one. And that's because the title alone makes it appear to be an imaging technique focused study. The emphasis is probably more focused on the methods and how they achieve the finding. It also involves a placental structure, which is interesting, but further looking into that, it's pretty niche and it's not a big picture extrapolatable model. And then 3D printing is cool, but again, the findings are just too constrained for us to talk about medical or health implications. So the second one, regulation of feather length, etc., seems interesting because it talks about feather length, obviously. And we did end up looking at the abstract beyond the title in this one, but the findings ultimately are about genetic signaling, which I guess you can kind of deduce from the title. So it's essentially not about why birds grow long feathers, it's about why do some cells help make feathers long. So the third one I tossed in here, I'm not going to bother reading it. It's just very technical. And I think bone regeneration does pique attention or pique interest, but at its core, this is a signaling pathway study. And you can kind of see that again at the end of the title. And so the last one, we missed it, but it was the newsworthy study. And we passed because it seemed very technical, but canine model should have flagged a little bit and hunger should have flagged a little bit. And so this ended up being a huge study, a story on why Labradors constantly want to eat. So after this came out, we started working even more closely with our journal editors, and we now have a process where they can flag to us far before production when a new study is something that they think will be interesting. So this is what, luckily reporters did catch this study because the affiliated university issued a press release, and so it got a lot of coverage, which was great. But okay, so beyond the summaries, we're also trying to add context to what we do. And we seek reporter feedback to do that. And what we've learned is that a lot of journalists value trend pieces. Like we're not so much writing one-off news studies anymore. People want context. That's what journalists and communicators can offer over AI, for example. So how did we adapt to an increased focus on trend reporting? We now add trend notes, where we provide past studies that our journals have published within our press packages. And these help reporters track the evolution of scientific fields and makes it a little bit easier for them to do their background work. And sometimes we even flag past studies from our journals that are now challenged by new insights. So you can see that screenshot here and what I did. No, this is what my colleague did. But you can see that we're building a narrative here. And so essentially, it's always our goal to provide up-to-date media with the most up-to-date information. Okay. So that's the trend notes. And then we also hold press briefings, much like any other communications office. And our press briefings are useful in more than one way. We hold them when we have a study that we know will be newsworthy. And for example, the chloramine toxicology study that we just talked about is a perfect example of that. But we also had a briefing on pre-bunking to restore election confidence recently, which is when you inoculate people against misinformation by exposing them by exposing them to truth, which is critical, before they're exposed to conspiracy. And in doing that, we were reaching again for reporters who want background for trend pieces rather than one-off news. So we also have thematic briefings at our annual meetings. And so this past year, our theme was research of societal importance that's flown under the media's radar by a polling of science family editors. And so we picked 5 scientists who were chosen by our editors to give a scoop on topics such as groundwater pollution and so forth. And we're also evolving our briefings in other ways. There are a few new things that we're doing to make sure that our briefings don't convey that science occurs in a vacuum. So this past spring, we had a briefing with authors from multiple studies, and it was to highlight a special issue in Science Advances that was focused on women's health. And you can see those bylines from that briefing here. Essentially, we wanted to help scientists as speakers contextualize their findings within each other's work, and that displays how science is an iterative process. And they were able to present a united front in the call for more research on women's health. So they talked about how sex-based differences manifest in women versus men during the progression of Alzheimer's disease and other studies relevant. So that was exciting to lead. But we're also incorporating themes in our briefings beyond, special issues that all feature the same research. We're highlighting now when opposite findings collide. So for example, we had a study come out on taurine, which is an amino acid that was thought to be a biomarker of aging. And the new study that came out this year said that that was not true. And so we held a briefing panel with authors from the previous and the current study where they could talk about their opposite findings. And in addition to hearing new results, the reporters got to see the scientific process at work, which is basically a healthy discussion about evolving takeaways. So it was a way for us to address scientific whiplash, which consumers of science news often talk about how red wine is healthy, now it's bad for you. Chocolate is healthy, now it's bad for you. And this is the types of topics that kind of paint science as a back and forth rather than a gradual process. And so our team also authored a piece explaining our decision to host the press briefing like that. So I can send a link if you're interested. But now I want to shift topics because in addition to what we're doing, we're also considering several things as our current administration makes certain changes. And first and foremost, we are not changing what we publish, which I think is an action in and of itself. We don't plan to change our language about sex and gender. We're going to continue to select studies about socioeconomic disparities and health inequity, and we're going to continue to amplify climate science because these are intentional choices that reflect solidarity with researchers. And then we held our annual conference in Boston previously this year, And the new administration's actions were a major focus because scientists were very concerned. And our CEO and other leaders with AAAS and apart from AAAS addressed this topic. And it's clear essentially that everyone is worried about cuts, freezes, and the crippling nature that these actions could have on scientific progress. So even as early as February 5th, our CEO testified on the Hill and said that actions are hurting the ecosystem and causing great anxiety. And that was fairly early in the series of actions that have now been happening. So our editor-in-chief also is consistently putting out editorials to reach concerned researchers and to foster community when there's an active dismantling of science right now. So there are some questions. Are we seeing a difference in funding, is funding impacting submissions and whatnot? And right now, we don't see any impact, but that's because a lot of this would affect 2026 onwards. And we're still actively working with many university public information officers. However, we have started to notice a lot less interactions with agency communicators from the NIH and NSA because their offices are kind of going dark. And so we're using this knowledge to work ahead and identify areas of collaboration with other agencies, so non-US funders like UKRI, which is in the UK, to adapt. And essentially, these expected impacts we know will manifest for US researchers. But again, our researchers are international in scale and scope, and so we still haven't yet seen a drop in submissions, and we're starting to see a surge from other countries like China. So these are just some changes we've noticed, but again, we're not going to see any full downstream effects till 2026. And on a team level, we're trying to address these changes proactively, much as our leadership has been. So we're expanding our role to include science communication training in a way. So Megan, again, communications director, is helping Holden Thorpe, our editor-in-chief, navigate an environment hostile to scientists right now. We ourselves are interacting with authors daily who may not be familiar talking to the press and aware of what they're getting into if they are studying on a specific topic like sex and gender. And these authors may also have less scaffolding from gutted agency press offices. So we're developing templates and guidance for navigating how you share your work online and for how you pitch explainers, for example, to The Conversation, which is an academic journalism run outlet. And we're also hosting meetings with doctor-run podcasts because we're realizing how important scientists are in science communication. This is not just a skill that's reserved for our specific demographic, but something we can all use. So another example of this, just to dive further into how we can offer a little bit of scaffolding on difficult topics, is that when we meet with authors ahead of our press briefings now, we talk to them about difficult questions that we anticipate based on our understanding of criticisms to the topic that they're focused on in their paper. So essentially, if an author is talking about PFAS or something, we want to make sure that they're aware of, any controversy surrounding that as a heavy pollutant. And we also try to talk to them about how they can address these ideas head on to reduce the chances of misrepresentation. So there's just a few closing thoughts that I wanted to leave us with. In the past, when I've visited different organizations or classes, I've talked about how the science writing landscape may seem daunting because of AI's emergence and the deprioritization of human science communication. But those have now become kind of placed in the back seat because right now we are at a critical inflection point where we need to present science as a legitimate process. And I think right now, it's also one of the best ways for us to show how we can use our specific skills to make a difference. Words have incredible power right now, and language is a very potent tool. And science communication gives you the ability to convey ideas accessibly. And we need to do that. We need to use this power to stress the need for areas of science under attack, like women's health, climate science, and so forth. And so that's kind of what our team is trying to do. And if you have any questions, you can email vancepack@AAAS.org, or you can register for our press packages or apply to be on our press packages at Eureka Alert. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail, for joining us today. And this QR code that's on the screen right now, you can feel free to scan that and learn more about our certificate program in civic science communication that we launched at Boston University's College of Communication. So if you want to learn more about the program and what we offer, please feel free to visit the website using the QR code. Now we'll open up the floor for questions. So I'll kick us off with the first question, and then the audience, please, if you have a question, feel free to take yourself off of mute and let us know what your question is. If you wanted to go first, you can feel free to do that, Edward.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Abigail, for speaking with us. I guess I'm curious, like, if you see people other than journalists interacting with sort of either like your workshops or the packs that you put out, like, do you think policymakers or legislative aides read the policy pack?
So
And
we
then,
have an embargoed system, which means that you have to apply for registration to access and you have to have credentials with some sort of journalism outlet. However, we are targeting newsletters that's like newsletter academic journalist outlets, like basically The Hill or like Axios. And we're targeting them and recruiting them to our policy press package because we know that lawmakers read these things. And then we've also developed a post-embargo press package where we send to, our mass media fellows or our science policy fellows, so that they are getting this information. And when they're, put into offices or assigned offices, they're able to share that as well.
got it. Thanks. And I guess, like, are there weeks where you maybe like don't really have 4 or 5 good stories in science advances that you want to write about? I'm just curious.
No, because we publish 60 studies a week.
Okay.
So there's usually something that's pretty. I will say that some of the content at the other journals, they publish less in volume, so everything gets covered. For example, if you only have 4 studies coming out, you don't have a press package without the 4 studies. But um in general, no. I think maybe sometimes it'll be a little more like biomolecular than I would like.
Okay.
Like it's hard to extrapolate a bigger picture when you're just doing a cell study. But at the same point, it could be like a biomolecular study on amyloid protein, accumulation, which is still really interesting and still very important for the development of medicine against like neurodegeneration. So no, is the is the short answer.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. And for our student learners, are there any resources that they can access as a student, or any resources that you can share with that population, graduate students who are interested in science communication?
Yeah, so we actually partner with science journals and programs to offer Eureka membership. And I'm not sure if this would apply to civic science certificate program, but we could discuss that offline later. However, there are also a lot of resources online, like the Open Notebook and the National Association of Science Writers. There we go. And these are great websites that have a ton of resources, and then also the association is very useful. And then based on where you are, there are regional science writers associations too that have, but ultimately the Open Notebook is pretty critical or titular, I guess.
Awesome. Could you walk us through a typical day in your life as a science writer? What is it? What do you do? And like, what's your role? And like, how do you source your stories?
So every day is very different, but then it repeats the next week. So my Mondays through Fridays look different from each other, but then from week to week they look the same. So basically, our lineup for the week. So every time the journal publication list is finalized, we receive it on Friday. And then all Thursday, and then all Friday, I'm drafting. So I'm outlining and creating like a template where I can go over with my editor how I plan to line the story up. And then Monday, I'm just writing. I mean, I'll have a few meetings and whatnot too. Um, Tuesday, I meet with my editor, and then I'm more writing. And then I also have, we look for multimedia on that day. Um, but yeah, it's just a lot of work. And then Wednesday, I send the drafts out to the journal editors for their review for accuracy. And then they're edited by my supervisor. And then I fix them and then we repeat the process. So it's honestly a lot of writing. Usually I'm working on 2 to 3 studies on Monday and Friday independently for drafting because I try to have them ready to go. So that's a lot of study reading as well.
It sounds like a very iterative process, but very
Yes.
cool. What advice would you give to emerging science communicators who are trying to get published in the high impact journals or related platforms? What would you share with them as your like,
So I think as a non-scientist, but also as someone who works closely with the science magazine editors and has talked to them about this before, the most important thing you can do is tell the so what. Like you need to make sure that your finding isn't like you need to share what makes your finding different, but also why? Like, what is the background here? It's not just I found a T-Rex bone. It's I found a T-Rex bone in this location where no dinosaurs have been found before, and we thought it was, like younger. This site was much younger than we now know it is to be. You need to make sure that you're telling the whole story with the whole findings, because otherwise, something cool just doesn't work anymore. It has to be something cool as in its context. Yeah, to reiterate, yeah.
definitely. Awesome. What role do you see science writers playing in shaping the public's understanding and trust within science at this moment in time within our like socio-political media landscape? What role do you think science role writers play in that arena?
I think it's hard because there's so many forms of media now. We are actually trying to reach out to content creators more. But I also think to your point, Edward, it's we're trying to target lawmakers more because, people love reading about what's cool, but there's a lot of fatigue about climate science. So why are we creating, you know, why are we writing a summary about another model that says this important ocean circulation system in the Arctic is going to collapse if no action is done? It's because we need to like get it into the eyes of those who could see it and then maybe like reinforce some action. And so um I think it's just you have to pick your audience to make sure that you can stay, you have to decide what audience you're going for. And then you have to understand that other audiences, like the public, may not be as interested. And I think there's merit to both of those topics. Like a cool discovery is always going to get reads in the public. And I think it's important to remind people right now that science is fun. But I also think you have to shift your audience to get lawmakers right now because you're not going to get as wide of a readership as you would before.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you a personal question. If you had to identify one of the stories that you're most proud of that you worked on at AAAS, which one would that be, and what was so special about it?
It kind of varies. I have a very, because of my workflow is so tight of a turnaround, I forget a lot of what I've written because every week it's five new studies. I
Right.
will say though, I'm so happy that we did a Science Advances special issue in women's health. And the way we handled that in our press package was unique because each of our summaries covered five studies. So we were able to cover like around 15 studies in this special issue. And we gave all those very important platforms. And I talked to my supervisor to kind of championship that format. And it was just really rewarding to be able to get all of these themes out there in a way that I don't think you often have the liberty to do with a news brief.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Abigail, for your presentation and your engagement with our discussion. We really appreciate you and welcome you back anytime. Everyone that's joined today, thank you for your participation and your questions. And we look forward to our next month's chat. Keep communicating science with passion, and we'll see you next month. Take care.